Shaquille O'Neal and LeBron James might be heading toward one of the biggest public feuds the NBA has seen in a long time. And strangely enough, the entire situation began with a brutally honest comment Shaq made about Bronny James. "I told his father the kid wasn't ready for the NBA." That single statement opened the door to a controversy that quickly spiraled into something much bigger, because what followed wasn't just criticism about Bronny's game. It became a conversation about how he got into the league in the first place, and once the details started coming out, people began questioning whether this was one of the most controversial draft situations in recent NBA history. It all exploded during the same offseason when LeBron James agreed to a 2-year, $104 million extension with the Los Angeles Lakers. At almost the exact same time, Bronny James, a player who wasn't viewed as a top prospect and hadn't dominated at the college level, received a guaranteed NBA contract after being selected with the 55th pick in the draft, and that's where fans started raising eyebrows. Because historically, the 55th pick isn't where franchises expect to find future stars. Most players drafted that late are fighting just to earn a summer league invite, let alone a guaranteed roster spot. In many cases, second rounders spend years grinding through the G League, hoping for a chance that may never come. Look at the players selected around that range in recent years. Kyle Guy got a 2-way contract. Jay Scrubb received a 2-way deal. Aaron Wiggins started on a 2-way. Isaiah Wong also had to work through a 2-way contract situation. That's usually how things go for late second round picks, unless your last name happens to be James. Despite averaging just 4.8 points, 2.8 rebounds, and 2.1 assists during his lone season at USC, Bronny still landed a 4-year contract worth nearly $8 million, including fully guaranteed money in the first 2 seasons. And the shooting numbers made the situation even harder for critics to ignore. He shot under 27% from 3-point range, while appearing in only 25 games. That's why so many people around the league were stunned by how quickly everything happened. But the contract itself wasn't even the most shocking part of the story. The real bombshell came during the 2024 NBA draft broadcast when former Golden State Warriors GM Bob Myers revealed something that immediately set social media on fire. According to Myers, Rich Paul, LeBron James's longtime agent, had reportedly contacted teams during the draft with a very direct warning about Bronny. "Don't take Bronny James. If you do, he's going to Australia." And the moment that information became public, the entire conversation around Bronny's draft selection changed overnight.
Rich Paul is threatening teams not to draft Bronny James, saying if they draft him, he'll leave to Australia.
Let's call the 2024 NBA draft what it really was. This wasn't the Lakers discovering some overlooked prospect hidden deep in the second round. The entire outcome felt predetermined from the beginning. Bronny James was always ending up in Los Angeles, and LeBron ultimately got the scenario he had openly talked about for years, sharing an NBA team with his son. Sure, from a personal standpoint, it's an incredible moment, but from a basketball perspective, many people viewed it as one of the most questionable roster decisions the league has made in years. And Shaquille O'Neal was one of the first major voices willing to say it publicly. Before Bronny even played his first NBA game, Shaq openly stated that he believed Bronny belonged in the G League and needed more time before competing at the NBA level. As the season unfolded, his criticism only gained more attention because the production on the court never really silenced the doubts. During his rookie season, Bronny averaged 2.3 points per game while shooting 31.3% from the faster 7s field and 28.1% from 3 across 27 NBA appearances. Then, during the 2025-26 season, his field goal percentage hovered around 35%. Those numbers don't exactly paint the picture of a player forcing his way into the rotation. Through performance, they reflect someone still struggling to adjust to the speed and talent level of the NBA. And while Bronny continued holding on to a guaranteed roster spot, other players fighting for those same opportunities were getting pushed aside. Jordan Goodwin is a perfect example. He joined the Lakers, got waived in October 2024, battled his way back onto the roster through a two-way contract in February, brought energy and perimeter defense every time he stepped on the floor, and then got waived again in July 2025. Shortly after landing with the Phoenix Suns, he immediately earned meaningful minutes by doing exactly what the Lakers needed most: defending hard, staying active, and playing. Winning basketball. So from the outside looking in, it appeared the Lakers moved on from a player who could help them immediately while keeping a player who still wasn't NBA ready, and critics believed one. Major factor separated the two: the last name on the back of the jersey. That's the part that clearly bothered Shaq the most. Because this debate was never really about Bronny personally. Late second round picks struggle all the time. That's normal. The issue was the level of protection surrounding him, a guaranteed contract, security most players drafted that late never receive, and almost no realistic threat of losing his roster spot. For someone like Shaq, who helped define the Lakers' championship culture, that matters. When asked about the situation during an ESPN appearance, Shaq reportedly didn't hold back. "I've seen 7-footers in the G League eating noodles for dinner who can play circles around this kid. It's a tragedy for the game." And whether people agree with him or not, you can understand where his mindset comes from. In Shaq's era, wearing a Lakers jersey meant surviving enormous pressure and proving you belonged every single night. Kobe Bryant earned that respect, Shaq earned that respect. Nothing was handed out simply because of a name or reputation. That's why this situation struck such a nerve. The final roster spots in the NBA are usually battles. Players like Quinn Cook fought endlessly to stay in the league. Isaiah Thomas was the type of player willing to show up before sunrise, just for another opportunity to compete. Those spots are supposed to be earned. But to many critics, Bronny's place on the roster looked guaranteed from the very beginning, because his father happened to be LeBron James. And even though Lakers head coach JJ Redick later stepped in front of the media trying to defend the situation, the controversy never really disappeared.
Robin and I did not give Bronny anything. Bronny has earned this.
And look, credit to the coach for standing behind his player. That's part of the job. A coach is supposed to defend the guys in his locker room publicly. But at some point, the statistics speak louder than any media quote ever could. You can spin things however you want during interviews, but people watching the games can see what's happening for themselves. That's why Shaq's frustration goes beyond simply criticizing Bronny James as a player. From his perspective, this is about watching a franchise he helped elevate into a dynasty slowly turn into something that feels personal rather than competitive. To him, the Lakers aren't supposed to operate like a family business. They're supposed to represent the highest standard in basketball, and the guaranteed roster spot was only the start of it, because what really pushed Shaq over the edge had less to do with Bronny himself and more to do with comments LeBron James made earlier this year regarding past NBA eras and former legends. Once those remarks started circulating, the entire situation became even more personal for players from Shaq's generation. At that point, Shaq was already irritated by the way the Bronny situation had unfolded. But then LeBron appeared on his podcast while discussing the criticism surrounding his son's struggles. Instead of calming the conversation down, his comments only made the backlash louder, because it wasn't just about Bronny receiving a guaranteed deal with one of the most iconic organizations in sports anymore. LeBron also stepped into another controversial debate entirely when he argued that succeeding in today's NBA is tougher than playing during the 1980s and 1990s, and for legends like Shaquille O'Neal and players who built their careers in an era defined by physicality, hard fouls, and non-stop pressure. Those comments didn't sit well at all.
Because the game is different. Like, I want people to understand, and our fans to understand, that playing 82 games in the 80s and 90s is not the same as playing 82 games in the 2020s.
Right? Because that's where the whole argument starts falling apart. How can LeBron James go on national platforms claiming today's NBA is tougher and more talented than ever before, while at the exact same time his own son, the player whose college production looked more like a reserve at a mid-major program, lands a guaranteed contract with the most iconic franchise in basketball? That's the contradiction people can't ignore. You can't praise the league for being unbelievably competitive while also turning the Lakers' final roster spot into a situation that many fans believe was based more on family ties than basketball merit. That's why the criticism keeps growing louder, and Shaq didn't stay quiet about it either. During an episode of Inside the NBA, he pushed back hard against LeBron's comments about modern basketball being more difficult. Shaq basically argued that if LeBron truly believes today's era is tougher, then imagine dropping Bronny into the NBA of the 1980s or 1990s, before defensive 3-second violations existed, when dominant centers could camp directly under the rim waiting to punish anyone brave enough to attack the paint. In other words, Bronny wouldn't be dealing with open driving lanes and freedom of movement whistles. He'd be stepping into an era where someone like a prime Shaquille O'Neal was standing at the basket ready to turn every possession into a collision. Shaq reportedly summed up his feelings with a brutal statement: "If you think this era is harder than the NBA in the 80s and 90s, then you're showing you don't respect the history of the game the way you claim you do. And if your son is entering this league without earning it, that proves it even more." That's really the core of Shaq's frustration. From his point of view, the Lakers are no longer being treated strictly like a championship organization. Instead, he sees a franchise being used to build the James family legacy. And when the conversation shifts towards skill level, the older generation believes the history often gets ignored. Larry Bird became the first player in NBA history to shoot 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line in a single season. And he accomplished it twice during an era people now try to label as less skilled. Then there's the pace argument. Former NBA guard Lindsey Hunter, who actually played in multiple eras, pointed out that today's game doesn't even rank among the fastest periods in league history. According to him, the high-scoring 1980s teams were already pushing the tempo long before modern spacing became popular. Byron Scott backed that up too, reminding people that teams were regularly scoring over 100 points per game back then, while also dealing with far more physical defense. There were no soft-touch fouls protecting perimeter players. No automatic whistles every time a defender made contact. The mentality was simple: get hit, get up, and keep playing. And Shaq lived through that environment every single night. He battled inside a paint area that felt closer to a wrestling match than modern NBA basketball, yet still averaged over 26 points per game for an entire decade. That's the standard he remembers. That's the culture he believes built the Lakers dynasty. For Shaq and Kobe Bryant, practices were battles. If you weren't producing, you got exposed immediately. Kobe would outwork you until you broke mentally. Shaq would physically dominate you until you either improved or disappeared. Now compare that mentality to a player still struggling to shoot even 35% from the field while holding onto a protected roster spot. In the Lakers culture Shaq remembers, those numbers wouldn't just cost you minutes, they might get you cut altogether. Meanwhile, there are hungry G League players fighting every day for a fraction of that opportunity. That's the part Shaq still can't accept. But here's what makes this situation even bigger. At this point, some people might think this is simply personal between Shaq and LeBron. Maybe old tension, maybe ego, maybe jealousy. Except the criticism didn't stop with Shaq, not even close. Voices from all across the basketball world started saying the exact same thing, and one of the loudest was Stephen A. Smith. Back in January, Stephen A. spent multiple episodes of First Take questioning whether Bronny was truly prepared for the NBA. He argued that the pressure surrounding the situation wasn't fair to Bronny himself, and that the entire league could see he needed more development before stepping onto an NBA roster full-time. And that's when the story really started exploding.
Right now, Bronny James is averaging 0.3 points, 0.3 assists, and 0.4 rebounds.
At first, it seemed like standard sports media criticism. Analysts question a young player, debates happen on television, and everyone moves on. That's usually how these conversations go. But things took a completely different turn on March 6, 2025, during the Lakers-Knicks game at Crypto.com Arena. During a timeout, LeBron James walked directly over to Stephen A. Smith courtside and confronted him in full view of the cameras. The moment instantly went viral, and to Stephen A.'s credit, he didn't back away from his stance afterward. When he later appeared on Gil's Arena, he explained that the entire confrontation felt unnecessary and overblown because the point he had been making all along was pretty simple. He never claimed Bronny James could never become an NBA player. His argument was that Bronny, at that stage of his development, simply wasn't ready yet. That was it. That was the opinion that sparked a public confrontation during an NBA game. And according to Stephen A., the situation became even more uncomfortable behind the scenes. Before LeBron ever approached him courtside, representatives connected to Clutch Sports had reportedly already contacted him privately regarding his comments about Bronny, seemingly trying to discourage him from continuing the criticism publicly. So from Stephen A.'s perspective, there were two separate attempts to shut the conversation down. First privately through communication behind the scenes, and then publicly when LeBron addressed him face to face during the game itself. To many people watching, that revealed just how sensitive the entire Bronny discussion had become around LeBron and his inner circle. But once again, this wasn't just one critic speaking out. Charles Barkley had been questioning the situation long before Bronny ever played an NBA regular season game. Prior to the start of the 2024 season, Barkley openly said on Inside the NBA that he didn't believe Bronny was ready for the league yet. And then he followed it up with a comment that really grabbed attention. I like a lot of what LeBron has done, but this whole thing is a bad look for him. That statement hit hard because Barkley wasn't attacking Bronny personally. He was criticizing the circumstances surrounding him, and Barkley wasn't alone either. Former NBA player Charlie Villanueva also publicly questioned the decision, saying he didn't believe Bronny had reached NBA level yet and needed more time to develop before taking up a roster spot in the league. Even former NFL player Channing Crowder weighed in on the situation. After watching Bronny James in the G League, Crowder said the performances simply weren't standing out in any meaningful way. What really surprised him was the defensive side of the floor, the very area many scouts considered Bronny's biggest strength. According to Crowder, Bronny was consistently struggling on that end and getting beaten far too often for a player whose defense was supposed to separate him from the competition.
My theory is this.
That Bronny what?
Ain't no way he should be in the NBA. Come on. There's no way. My man averaged 5 points a game, right?
I didn't say a word. They got a 4-year guarantee.
Got a 4-year guarantee.
And that's what makes this whole situation so difficult to dismiss. None of these people were coordinating behind the scenes or teaming up to attack Bronny James. They all simply watched the same film, studied the same statistics, and came away with similar opinions on their own. That's why the criticism kept growing. It wasn't coming from one angry former player or one loud TV personality. It was coming from multiple voices across sports who independently reached the exact same conclusion. What made the backlash even more awkward, though, was the way LeBron responded to it. Instead of letting the conversation fade naturally, he either confronted Stephen A. Smith directly or went on the Pat McAfee show to publicly defend the situation himself.
Bronny James should not be in the NBA. I watched him go out there and get cooked the other night. Walked in the game, binked his ass, went up for a layup, went down, he missed the shot, they came back and binked his ass up.
And that's what makes LeBron's reaction so fascinating to people around the league. When you're heavily involved in your son's draft process, help shape the contract situation, and influence the entire development path, eventually the line between personal and basketball business disappears. At that point, the conversation naturally becomes personal because the situation itself was built that way from the start. That's why so many former players reject the idea that Shaq is simply acting like a bitter veteran complaining about the modern game. From his perspective, this goes beyond criticism. He feels genuinely offended by what he believes the Lakers have become, because Shaq remembers what it meant to enter the NBA and instantly dominate. His rookie season alone completely changed the energy of the league. He averaged 23.4 points, 13.9 rebounds, and 3.5 blocks per game as a first-year player. He wasn't surviving in the NBA, he was terrorizing it. Teams had to redesign entire defensive game plans just to deal with him. Now compare that to Bronny James, who in 2026 is still struggling to consistently score even 5 points on a given night. That's why critics say the comparison doesn't even feel fair. The gap in production and impact is enormous. To really understand the scale of it, think about this. If Bronny maintained his current pace for years, it would take decades just to approach some of the rebounding numbers Shaq had already piled up before turning 30 years old. Now compare that to Bronny James, who in 2026 is still struggling to consistently score even 5 points on a given night. That's why critics say the comparison doesn't even feel fair. The gap in production and impact is enormous. To really understand the scale of it, think about this. If Bronny maintained his current pace for years, it would take decades just to approach some of the rebounding numbers Shaq had already piled up before turning 30 years old. That's the level of dominance Shaq is comparing this situation against. And NBA fans know late second-round picks can absolutely become valuable players. The league has seen plenty of overlooked prospects develop into legitimate contributors. Patty Mills built a long and respected career after being drafted late. Aaron Wiggins worked his way into becoming a useful NBA rotation player through development and effort. Those players earned their place step by step. That's why some critics believe the Lakers passed up an opportunity to use that roster spot on someone ready to help immediately, instead committing nearly $8 million to what they view as a family-driven project. Meanwhile, Shaq spent 15 straight seasons putting up elite production while battling some of the toughest big men the league has ever seen. Players like Arvidas Sabonis, Patrick Ewing, and David Robinson. Those were massive physical Hall of Fame centers who turned every game into a war near the basket. And then, earlier this season, even the carefully managed father-son storyline appeared to crack for a moment. During a high-pressure game, Bronny made a major defensive mistake and LeBron visibly lost patience on the court. Instead of calmly coaching him through it, he openly yelled at him in front of everyone watching. Teammates, fans, cameras, all of it. For a brief second, the emotion of the entire situation finally spilled out in public.
For guys not performing, that is all part of the game. That's all part of the game. But when you take it and you get personal with it, it's my job to not only protect my damn household, but protect them.
And the fan reaction hasn't exactly helped calm things down either. By late 2025, reports were already showing declining Lakers television ratings, and a growing number of fans were openly frustrated with the direction of the franchise. To many people, it no longer felt like the Lakers were being run with championships as the only priority. Instead, critics believed the organization was becoming centered around the LeBron James family storyline. That's why some people don't view Shaq's comments as hatred at all. They see it as disappointment. From his perspective, he's watching a franchise built on ruthless competitiveness slowly drift away from the culture that once defined it. And somehow, the controversy only got even stranger, because if the guaranteed contract already upset fans, the reports surrounding Bronny's day-to-day G League arrangement took things to another level. According to multiple reports, Bronny James was primarily expected to appear in home games for the South Bay Lakers rather than fully traveling through the typical G League grind. And once that information spread online, the backlash exploded. Think about the reality for most G League players. These guys spend months fighting for opportunities, dealing with exhausting travel schedules, long bus rides, cheap hotels, and constant uncertainty just hoping for a 10-day NBA contract. Then they look across the room and see a player receiving special treatment before proving himself at the professional level. That's the part that reportedly pushed Shaq over the edge. He publicly questioned when the NBA development system became flexible enough for players to avoid the same grind everyone else has to endure. To him, it completely undermined the culture of earning your place. And according to reports, some veterans inside the organization weren't thrilled about it either. There were rumors that players like Rui Hachimura and DeAndre Ayton privately expressed frustration about the situation behind closed doors. After all, it creates an awkward environment inside a locker room built on accountability. How is a coach supposed to demand sacrifice from established veterans when a young player at the end of the bench appears to be operating under a completely different set of rules? That's why critics argued the situation put head coach JJ Redick in an impossible spot. Managing an NBA locker room already requires credibility and consistency, but when exceptions start getting made for one player, it risks weakening the message for everyone else. Even longtime journalist Michael Wilbon weighed in, arguing that the non-stop media protection surrounding the situation was doing a disservice to the standards previous NBA generations fought to establish. His point was simple: too much attention was being placed on a player who hadn't yet earned a meaningful role, while countless hardworking players across the league were being overlooked. Charles Barkley was even more direct about it. He openly criticized how the Lakers handled Bronny's development and made it clear that improvement doesn't come from sitting comfortably on the bench or avoiding the everyday grind that young players usually have to embrace.
First father-son duo on the floor together. Bronny to LeBron, and kind of looks.
But he should be in the G League. Dan, you don't get better sitting on the bench.
I agree. I wanted him to stay another year in college.
To a lot of longtime Lakers fans, the issue isn't that the organization lowered its standards. They believe those standards have completely disappeared. People who watched the Shaq and Kobe championship years look at today's situation and feel like the franchise has traded its identity for headlines, social media attention, and a Hollywood-style storyline. Just picture this for a second. Imagine walking into a Lakers practice in 2003 and telling Kobe Bryant that a rookie at the end of the bench could skip road trips while still keeping his roster spot secure. The idea sounds absurd because that culture simply didn't exist back then. Kobe didn't care about your reputation, your family connections, or how famous your name was. The only thing that mattered was whether you were willing to sacrifice everything for the jersey. If you weren't fully committed to the grind, you weren't lasting long in that environment. And during the Shaq-Kobe era, the pressure inside that locker room was intense precisely because both superstars were obsessed with protecting the standard. Their competitiveness pushed the entire franchise forward. Nobody received special treatment just for being connected to greatness. Now fast forward to 2026, and critics feel like the complete opposite is happening. They see a player who still looks unprepared for the NBA level being protected and promoted anyway, regardless of the production on the court. For the old school generation, that's difficult to accept because the Lakers culture they remember was built on earning everything. Every minute, every contract, every opportunity had to be fought for through relentless work and obsession with winning. That's why some former players get frustrated hearing claims that today's NBA is tougher than previous eras.